Yes, good morning. My name is Metaloro Halidi. I'm a master's student of gender at School of Women and Gender Studies, Makerere University. In this video, I'm going to discuss the topic of gender and humanitarian assistance. As part of the fulfillment of a coursework fulfillment for the award of master's degree in gender studies. I want to start by having a key definitions for the terminologies of humanitarian assistance, and then I will discuss gender and humanitarian assistance, then why gender is very important in humanitarian work, and then I'll go on to look at some of the different humanitarian situations, the core humanitarian principles. I'll also discuss the complex humanitarian emergencies, and then I will discuss some humanitarian agencies responding to complex humanitarian emergencies. And then I'll provide some critiques of humanitarian assistance program. Then I will also discuss some key challenges that aid providers face. Then I'll conclude by how we can make humanitarian aid more effective. Yeah, I think that will make up the video. I hope this video can be about 30 minutes. Yes, so humanitarian assistance is defined as the immediate life-saving aid that is provided to individuals and communities affected by crisis. Crisis can be conflicts, can be out of natural disasters like landslides, mudslides, can be a tsunami or an earthquake, or it could also be an epidemic like the way we saw COVID-19. So the immediate support that is provided to individuals or communities affected by such crisis is what we call humanitarian assistance. Humanitarian assistance is provided within some parameters of principles, among which include humanity. The principle of humanity basically requires that humanitarian assistance should reduce suffering, should reduce harm to those affected, or should reduce further suffering for those who are affected. It also requires, within the international humanitarian law, it requires protection of life, even if it involves the parties that are in a situation of conflict, parties that are fighting. You have to make sure that the support we provide does not escalate the situation, and they should be able to protect human life and dignity. And part of the issues within humanitarian humanity as a principle is prohibition of use of certain weapons or arms. There are mass weapons of destructions that within the international humanitarian law are not allowed to be used in a situation of crisis. That is principle number one, that's humanity. And then the principle number two is about neutrality. Neutrality is basically not taking sides, being non-partisan. in providing humanitarian aid, meaning that the aid providers should not advantage or disadvantage one side where the two parties who are involved in the conflict. That's principle number 2 of neutrality, and then principle number 3 is about impartiality. So the principle of impartiality emphasizes that assistance should be based on need. It should not discriminate. Assistance should be based on need and should not discriminate. The last principle I can talk about is about independence. The principle of independence requires that aid providers or humanitarian assistance providers should be autonomous, and they should not be influenced by any political, socio-economic or military objectives within the humanitarian setting, within the crisis. So this requires that aid reaches those in need, regardless of their location, political affiliation, or background. So that's basically what humanitarian assistance means. Then we can talk about gender and humanitarian assistance. Gender comes in a way that first, that when crisis happen, crisis affects people, both men and women, differently, and the impacts of crisis is different for both men, women, boys, and girls. So gender and humanitarian assistance therefore requires that gender perspectives should be incorporated within humanitarian response in order to ensure that the response meets the diverse needs of all gender groups. Gender system approaches therefore ensure that humanitarian interventions are inclusive and effective and equitable to both women and men. But then why gender? Why do we have gender in humanitarian assistance? We are aware that crisis can either exacerbate or narrow down the different gender inequalities between men and women, or among actual communities, and aware that our social environment is shaped by both gender roles and gender norms. It's therefore important that humanitarian assistance should have gender lenses and specifically focus on those gender inequalities, address those gender norms, address the power related issues, and be able to be able to be sensitive to the unique vulnerabilities for women and men. And also aid should be inclusive, equitable, and effective. So the specific issues that humanitarian assistance providers should consider or should take into account during humanitarian work as follows. One is the gender impact of crisis. We are aware that when crises happen, or we should be knowing that when crises happen, women and girls face the risks of gender-based violence. There are sexual violences and exploitations, and there are issues of trafficking, child trafficking. And for men and boys, there are possibilities of being recruited into armed groups the issues of mental health issues facing men and even women. For example, in some of those worst case scenarios, uh, you find in a crisis situation, you find sometimes your own family members are tortured, women are raped, your own daughter are raped before you, and sometimes your own wife, they are subjected to all forms of violence, and as a result, the psychosocial impact it creates is very critical for aid providers to know. So as you serve communities or people who suffered from humanitarian crisis, you should be aware that there are those crisis impacts they are holding inside that you need to be sensitive to and design programs to address them. Another thing is that when crises happen, people lose their livelihoods, and this impacts their lives and their social well-being. For example, if we know men are always the breadwinners, they are the head of the family, and when a crisis happens, that means whatever work the person does to earn living is destabilized. And the impact of that is that the man will not be able to provide, and probably the woman's also what's supposed to do, provide for a household, she will not be able to do, and this has a far-reaching impact. It affects them, and in terms of gender, if a man loses her responsibilities or doesn't provide, he no longer provides for what society ascribes should have been his role, that can cause a lot of psychosocial and can degenerate into violence cases. So that is why gender impact of crisis is very important to consider humanitarian situation. Issue number 2 is about sexual and gender-based violence. SGBV occurs a lot during humanitarian emergencies. So humanitarian workers, they opt to prevent and respond to SGBV cases in a better way through setting up safe spaces, designing psychosocial mechanisms, be able to improve reporting and referral mechanism for those survivors, and should be able to engage women and men and community level initiatives to address some of those root causes of sexual gender-based violence. And the same goes to the aid providers. The humanitarian workers also need to take all precautions to ensure that their actions do not lead to SGBV cases. Issue number 3 is about access to resources and services. Gender norms can limit access to resources in humanitarian crisis. For example, during crisis, you find essential social services like health, education, water, housing services are usually paralyzed, and as a result, the impact is greater for women due to gender-related norms. Different norms dictate how women's life, how they access certain services. So in the humanitarian context, it is important that we acknowledge that essential services are being accessed differently by the different category of gender groups, and therefore we need to ensure interventions designed provide for specific access for women's needs and men. Issue number 4, why gender is very important in humanitarian context, is about participation and decision making. In humanitarian context, active participation is very critical for women to participate in community decision making processes, so that response can be effective. It's proper to consult communities on how best their needs can be met, and what exactly do they need. Giving opportunities for them to participate, and usually in those community meetings we find men dominate the conversation, and it is proper for aid workers to have a deliberate effort to ensure that women in attendance of those meetings are given opportunity to share, their experiences as well, so that their specific needs can come clear in the discussions, and you can be able to plan accordingly. Programs designed should be able to take care of the specific gender needs by humanitarian workers. It's critical that a typical rural woman's calendar in a day is packed with activities, and that means from your planning, if you plan to have a meeting where you want some women to participate, your meeting should be sensitive to a typical calendar of a woman in a day. That means the timing of the meeting, the time it starts and the time it ends, should be taken care of some of the gender roles that are associated with women, and if possible, efforts should be given to deliberately do targeted mobilizations for women to participate, and also part of the participation is for women and men to be able to participate in the evaluation of programs. Most times when programs are designed and they are delivered, due to different reasons, humanitarian actors do not give opportunity for women and men to evaluate the impact of the program. And by so doing, we're missing a lot of information, insights that could be helpful in redesigning the next phase of programs. So evaluation process is very key, and it's crucial that both women and men should participate in the process of evaluation. Another issue to consider is about sex and age aggregated, disaggregated data. This is crucial during the design of programs. Gender responsive humanitarian assistance requires the collection and analysis of sex and age disaggregated data to understand how different groups are affected by different crises, and tailor responses accordingly. So accurate data really is the thing to go to help in resource allocation. Yes, those are a few critical points or reasons as to why it's crucial to consider gender in humanitarian assistance. Let us talk briefly about the core humanitarian principles. The core humanitarian principles are six. Principle number one is about humanity. Like I explained earlier, humanity is about relieving human suffering, protecting life and health, respecting human dignity. Principle number two is about impartiality, where we said aid should be solely on need and without discrimination. And neutrality is principle number three, which is about ensuring that actors or humanitarian assistant workers should not take sides, and they should not engage in political or military agendas of the status quo. Now, principle number four is about independence. Independence here requires the autonomy of not being part of political, military, or other humanitarian objectives. Principle number five is about accountability. Accountability requires that humanitarian assistance workers or actors should remain transparent in execution of humanitarian work, but should also be responsible to the actions of their work or decisions they have made, but also be able to provide opportunity for providing feedback, for giving feedback for those they are serving. Feedback is two-way. Feedback can be from the donor to the humanitarian worker, but also from the people served to the agent who is providing humanitarian work, who is providing humanitarian assistance. So feedback is very critical. So it's important for humanitarian assistance workers to ensure that they put on ground mechanisms to allow beneficiaries to provide feedback and be able to provide also a response to those feedbacks. In so doing, you get to address a lot of misconceptions. You get to know how your team in the field is working. You get to know how your program is impacting life, and among others. The last principle is do no harm. The principle of do no harm requires that aid or assistance should not or does not cause vulnerability or create new ones. There is a likelihood that the assistance you are providing for a crisis-affected people can cause more problems. For instance, if we are providing aid in a community where you have the host community and you have the refugee community, if your program design does not cater for both of these parties, say the host and the refugees, chances are high that youths or individuals who have been missed, who have not been planned for, are going to cause problems. As a few weeks ago, I was having a meeting with one of the refugee communities in a refugee settlement in Loble refugee settlement in Koboko district. This was a feedback meeting, and we had all partners there, UNHCR, OPM, and other implementing partners are all there. And one of the things the community raised was that World Vision gave out some goods as part of distributed goods as part of livelihood support program, and the mechanism was that people come in groups, refugees and host communities come in groups, different groups, refugee groups alone, and the host community groups alone, and they are given goods, and as such, some groups received, some did not receive. But what happened a few months after the implementation of the project, conflict started arising, because some of the youths who did not attend the meeting were raising issues that we are hosting refugees and they are giving them goods and we are not being served. And this was already beginning to raise conflict within the settlement. And of course, that platform of the meeting was able to give us opportunity to address. And World Vision came out clearly to explain how this happened, the process of organizing, the process of the design of the project, and how groups were arrived at. And later it was established that those who were actually causing harm, who were causing conflict, who were raising issues, causing issues, were those who did not attend the meeting, and they thought they were left out. But only to find that actually these youths did not participate in the meetings and they were not part of the groups. So it's important to sorry. It's important to ensure that programs do not cause harm to refugees or hosts in humanitarian setting. I want to briefly talk about complex humanitarian assistance emergencies. This can be defined as situations of crisis that involve widespread human suffering. That are typically caused by conflicts, political instability, and collapse of state institutions. In such complex humanitarian situations, usually state institutions collapse, services are paralyzed, and it often requires multifaceted international responses due to their complex nature and the complex nature, scale, and the protracted nature. And also they can lead to a breakdown of social, political, and economic structures within the community, or creating long-term consequences for affected populations. So that is a best example can be the crisis in Palestine. The crisis in Palestine shows that humanitarian work public services is destabilized. We can also give an example of the South Sudan crisis, where at the onset it caused a lot of transport systems were broke down. There was no actual rule of law, and the situation was very difficult even for humanitarian aid workers to be able to provide humanitarian assistance. So these complex humanitarian emergencies are usually characterized by protracted conflict of crisis, massive displacement of people. Usually they are characterized by breakdown of governance and the rule of law. They are also characterized by widespread human rights violation and abuse. There are issues of deterioration of health and livelihoods and involvement of multiple actors. So in such complex humanitarian emergencies, we have humanitarian agencies that respond to those kind of situations. These particularly include the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. We have United Nations High Commission for Refugees. We have World Food Program. We have International Committee for the Red Cross and Medicine Sans Frontiers, Doctors Without Borders. We have Save the Children, International Rescue Committee, and Oxfam. These are among the key agencies that usually respond to humanitarian situations or emergencies of high scale. Humanitarian work generally has not been all what we think it is. It has undergone quite a number of critics and including challenges. And I want us to talk briefly about some of the challenges humanitarian crises usually go through or they've been criticized for. One of them is the lack of coordination and fragmentation of humanitarian assistance. We have seen that humanitarian workers usually have issues of coordination with the fellow humanitarian workers and local government and government authorities in the host countries. And usually coordination leads to inadequate coordination or lack of proper coordination leads to duplication of efforts, but also inefficiencies and inefficiencies in terms of resource management, in terms of program delivery, and usually there are gaps in the delivery of humanitarian assistance. And this is a critical issue. Another thing is another point is about dependence on aid. Humanitarian assistance usually causes, in most cases, actually leads to dependence by the host nation. I can understand why they depend, because I think within the UN Charter, international humanitarian law, and so on, other international instruments, UN agencies are obligated to provide assistance to host countries, especially those that are hosting refugees and hosting provide asylum camps, like the case of Uganda. But the issue is usually the beneficiaries or the refugees that are being hosted tend to rely so much on the assistance being provided by the agencies. We have seen this in the different basement camps. I had the opportunity to work in the refugee camps in West Nile, and one of the things is the issue of dependence, that people depend on hand-to-mouth kind of support, and this in the long run can be dangerous, especially when funding shrinks down, or when the response reaches the stage of from the responses reached to the stage of now people being self-sustaining, and we find communities are not able to sustain themselves. So it is important that these aid workers or agencies are able to understand and ensure that their design be able to address the issue of aid dependency, but also dependence usually undermines dependence on aid, undermines local economies. What refugee communities, host communities can be able to do, that or things that they can be able to do within their means, they tend to neglect it, waiting for let's say ratios to come, and in eventualities where, like the scenario that happened recently, where one of the biggest funding country was terminated its funding to the world. You find people are left with nothing. And then humanitarian assistance or humanitarian work has been also critiqued for imposing external solutions to the communities that are suffering without clear understanding of cultural, social, and political context of affected communities. And they also criticized for focusing on short-term relief programs rather than long-term sustainability programs. And then there's the challenge of politicization of aid. Humanitarian programs have been accused of peddling political ambitions within the donor political ambitions that are of the donor governments, and they are passed through international organizations using aid as a tool and leading to undermining the sovereignty of the host country where these programs have been implemented. Short-term focus and lack of sustainability I did mention about that. I did mention about sufficient planning for long-term recovery and reconstruction of affected communities is an issue. And then we have the critical of inadequate protection of vulnerable groups. Reports have shown that humanitarian aid workers have failed to address needs of vulnerable groups like women and men, boys and girls, especially those that are elderly. The programs are designed like as a mainstream program for crisis affected people. Then let's discuss some challenges for aid providers. Some of the key challenges for aid providers include security risks and access constraints. In a typical security context, for example, the Sudan and South Sudan in security situation, you find aid workers find it difficult to reach with aid, as is the case with the Palestine crisis, where sometimes one fighting party deliberately makes it very difficult for the other party to be served with aids. This is one of the challenges aid workers face, but they also face military and political interferences. In most cases, humanitarian assistance are often politicized, with aid being used as a tool. I did mention this, but also the political interference affecting the equitable distribution of aid, which means it undermines the principle of independence and neutrality, as well as the principle of impartiality. There are also challenges of logistical related challenges, such as hard to reach areas where infrastructure is not well developed, roads connections are very poor. You find sometimes these infrastructures are broken down purposely as a war strategy, which makes aid provision very difficult. A fleet of aid service may not be able to reach the targeted communities. The aid workers also suffer from challenges of cultural sensitivity and understanding. It is a common phenomenon that cultural difference can result in misunderstanding, mistrust, and ineffective delivery. For example, language. Most times, humanitarian assistants who work in emergency situations find themselves in communities that they are not familiar with. They have the social cultural norms, the barriers of language, those norms that prevent, for example, men mixing with women, especially in Islamic related states. There are programs that there are cultural norms that does not allow certain particular projects to be implemented within context of or within some specific population group. So all these are very serious issues that aid workers struggle with. And then the second last issue is about inadequate funding and resource constraints. Of course, we know funding for crisis response is contributed by different donor countries, and in a situation where one country withdraws, that means there are bound to be cuts in humanitarian assistance, and that affects programs, and which directly affects those affected by crisis. And in fact, this is really a living example, because when US cut aid to some of its development agencies, like you said, and so on, many people are affected, and refugees are affected as well. In the last meeting I earlier referred to, one of the concerns refugees were raising is how they are going to cover up the reduction in ratios. And I think UNHCR and OPIM was very quick to respond to them and tell them to start diversifying, engage in agriculture, be able to hire gardens from host communities, and as a coping mechanism. So another challenge that aid providers face is the issue of ethical dilemmas and moral responsibility. This is drawn from the different principles that humanitarian workers are supposed to be adhering to. Humanitarian workers are human beings. They also see what is happening. They have their own positions, feelings to these issues. So sometimes it raises a lot of moral and ethical dilemmas in the work they do, because if one party is fighting another and the other party has strength, for example, if you are distributing aid to a party that has strength they have strength, and the other party whom they are fighting does not have a strength, it raises a dilemma of moral dilemma, whether you should continue and do this like you are part of the supporting the other party to fight the other one. Another thing is the impact of aid on the local economy. Sometimes aid also destabilizes the local economies in a way that in the local economy, from West Nile region, we have there's a stable market prices for products, goods and services. But when the refugee crisis happened and the West Nile became a host of refugees, suddenly commodity prices had to go high, with the anticipation that there is high demand. Now UNHCR, UPM, whatever agencies are going to come in, then there is money altogether. So you find food vendors are likely to increase prices, which will affect the local economy in terms of those who will not have access to that humanitarian support. There are also issues of being neutral versus human rights. The principle of humanitarian, the principle of neutrality requires that aid workers should be neutral. Aid should be provided based on need and does not discriminate. But you find there are also issues of human rights violations, and this can generate a lot of dilemma in terms of personal position. Then, how can we make humanitarian aid better? A few points to this will include improved coordination among humanitarian actors. I think there is a need for humanitarian actors to improve their coordination, harmonize their program work plan through quarterly sector coordination meetings, through retune coordination meeting with the host districts or host um, countries. At national level, they can harmonize program with the sector plans and see how they can be able to incorporate and be able to maximize on identify areas of synergies and be able to ensure that duplication is reduced. Another thing is strengthening local capacities and ownership. I think it is very prudent that when crises happen, international agencies come on ground, they should have it part of their program design that they should build capacity of local CBOs that are within the host or those national based CBOs and NGOs so that the impact of their support can be sustained, but also as first responders, it is critical to have these capacities of local actors built in order to respond when crises happen. I think I have been lucky to be part of the Charter for Change conversation that was championed by Oxfam, and in short doing, we were able to implement different programs under the ELNA project, empowering local and national actors to respond to crisis. And I think that should be the way to go, the Charter for Change, but also the localization agenda. It needs to be prioritized so that local capacities can be strengthened and be able to respond to emergencies. By the time international agencies come, then they must find the local actors on the ground already doing something. Then it is also important to adopt a longer term perspectives. Programs should be focusing on long term relief needs and long term recovery needs of during crisis. And another thing is focusing on protection and accountability. Protection should focus on vulnerable groups such as women and children, minorities from violence, exploitation, and abuse, but also accountability to host districts, to host nations, accountability to donors, accountability to those affected. It needs to be strengthened. And then another aspect is enhancing the use of technology. I think this is critical in as far as providing aid or assistance to hard to reach places. For example, if we had embraced or if technology we had the advanced technology, access to advanced technology, aid would be provided through the use of drones to hard to reach places, but also I think the innovations of cash transfers has worked very well, although there are few small operational challenges related to them that I think can be fixed. Overall, I think technology will be helpful in addressing or improving humanitarian assistance. And the second last point I want to talk about is promoting gender-sensitive approaches. I think the gender-sensitive approaches has been at core part of humanitarian assistance, and I think we need to further strengthen those initiatives by ensuring that we do gender analysis of humanitarian situations. We do gender mainstreaming of humanitarian assistance, but also we need to do gender evaluation or gender audit of humanitarian assistance. It's important that this needs to become specific in program designs so that gender concerns, gender issues within humanitarian are neglected. They are they can come at the forefront of program design. Lastly is for agencies and development planners, development funders to improve funding mechanisms. And I think the focus here is making sure that funds are available for any humanitarian emergencies, probably through reserves, funds that are set aside to respond to crisis. Because we know these crises usually do not come as in where everyone can plan ahead of time that there's going to be a crisis. They always happen suddenly. Then second is that there need to be flexibility within the funding mechanisms, especially the bureaucracies that are associated with the funding processes, but also once the fundings are delivered, with the bureaucracies related to how funding can be able to avert sufferings, can be avert situation is very critical. And then the last one is, I think there's need for funding agencies to prioritize multi-year funding programs instead of only having so 1 year, 2 year funding extreme. They should be planning for long-term, medium to long-term funding commitments to support both infrastructural needs and also some of those immediate response needs during crisis. Yeah, I think that's where I want to stop. Thank you very much, colleagues, for the support, and also thank you whoever. I ask all of you to take time and watch the video and be able to give it a like and probably say it. Yeah, thank you so much.